All right, good morning. My name is Wes Licht, and I'm on the board of directors here. This is Jane Licht, also on the board of directors. I guess we're going to be your major guides. We have other people from our board here. Dick is hiding back there. But the main person that has organized all this is Gail Aaron, and you probably all are familiar with Gail through many activities that she has done.
And Dale.
And there's Dale, yeah, Dale Marsden. Dale is our president. He's been president for many, many years. And so that's very important to us. He is a man of all trades. He does electrical work, he does painting, he does anything that we ask him to do, just about. And he has been a great president for a long time. So welcome again to the McFarland Historical Museum. We are open by invitation or request, I guess you put it that way. We have open houses mostly through the summertime, from Memorial Day on Monday through the September. And so that's usually 1 to 3 or 1 to 4.
1 to 4 on
Sunday.
Sundays. Yeah, both museums.
Yeah, the Larson House, and as well as our museum, log cabin, and annex. So you're welcome any of those times. But as Jane and I often do when we have guests coming, company or friends from out of state or out of town, we often make a special effort to get to the museum because there's always something a little bit new that we can show them, and we have a lot of fun doing that. As you can see, we have a farm display up here. We have a fantastic amount of lovely pictures of farms and lots of tools, a lot of equipment. We have farm homes over here, and last summer and for the last 2 summers, we had a model farm display by the Tom Thrun family. He had about 3 times, you could hardly just walk around the edge of it. It was really a beautiful thing with all his animals and machinery, and the house is built to scale. We are in future times going to be owning that display, and not sure exactly where or how we're going to put it all together, but because we have, as you'll see, many things on display and very little extra room. Some of you, I noticed, were looking at the window display. It's often best viewed in the evening when the lights are on in there and there's no sun glare, but it wasn't too bad this morning. So this display here is emphasizing the pig on the farm, okay? And every bit but the squeal. And that's something my father taught me or told me about. He said he says you use every part but the squeal. And the hat that I have on is one that he used to wear when he would go to town. My dad was born in 1899, and so he saw tons of history. And it was remarkable to think about all the things. And when he took his first airplane flight from Des Moines, Iowa to, or maybe it was Chicago, to LA and to Hawaii, he was totally impressed. He came back with all these numbers of how big the plane was and how many fast it went and how much it weighed and all that. He just couldn't believe all that kind of stuff. So why was a pig so important for the pioneer families? Who can think of things that the pig was used for?
Food.
Food, absolutely.
Candles.
I'm sorry?
Candles.
Candles. What do you mean candles?
Fat.
The fat, was it used for making candles? Okay.
Oh.
So here's an old wooden sausage stuffer. We have the lard press here. I inherited one of these lard presses from my parents, and we have the spigot on this end here, and my parents, when they gave it to us, we decided that we were going to make a sausage, and we made brats using this machine there. Pretty cool. It's also used for harvesting grapes, crushing the grapes, that kind of thing. We have material here for, here's a wooden lard press. We have gambrel and a hide scraper here, meat saw, cleavers, and here we have a soap mold and home soap recipe, and here's where you made the lye water for mixing with the pig fat and other ingredients that are listed here, borax soap, that kind of thing. So all these things are all related to our pigs on the farm. And you can see that they are also great garbage collectors here, and they love the grain that was spilled on the fields and stuff like that. They produced lots of large litters, and so it was a real good animal on the farm. We're going to go through, I'm going to take part of you to the log cabin, and Jane is going to work with you in the museum here, and let's look at the time.
Okay, and yes, again, I'm Jane Licht, and welcome to the museum, your McFarland Museum, and we'll start right here. So this is the Scarry Memorial, and the reason why we are having this nice display about the Scarries is because they provided the first group of artifacts for the museum. Albert Scarry, this is Albert and Julia, and then they actually had no children. But Albert grew up on Hidden Farm, and he had a couple of log cabins. His family actually lived, and he was born in this log cabin over here, and he loved it. When he got older, he loved to collect things, especially things from Norway, farm implements and kitchen goods, and he just filled this log cabin full of artifacts. And then when he died, his niece, who inherited everything, she donated it to the McFarland Historical Society, and there were thousands of artifacts. And so that really got, was the impetus for all of the things that we have here. And of course, we've collected many things since that time, but we wanted to recognize the Scarry collection. And we were able to move, piece by piece, the log cabin to behind this facility, and you'll get to visit the log cabin. So we will have to sort of move along here. This is a nice little display of weddings that occurred years ago in McFarland. Now this is Ian Edwards. He was the fellow who actually built the Larson House, and he and his lovely wife Anna, this is on their wedding day, and here we have Anna's actual wedding gown. You can see how tiny she was. Yeah. So now the wedding suit was not Ian Edwards, but it is a nice wedding suit, a gentleman's suit. And then we continue around here, around this corner. And this corner is dedicated to McFarland schools and area schools. We had little one-room schoolhouses all over the McFarland area in Blooming Grove and in the town of Dunn. And then the very first McFarland schoolhouse was a two-room schoolhouse. That was kind of a big deal because they didn't have just one teacher, they had two teachers. And the primary kids were on the first floor, and then the older kids were on the second floor. And then we're going to go to earlier settlers in McFarland, the very first people in McFarland. And this is a lovely display that Conrad Yeager made back in the 1970s. Conrad was very active and he was on the board of directors for the society. And he researched and built a Ho-Chunk village. And there actually was a Ho-Chunk village at Babcock Park. And you can see in the background, we've got Babcock Lagoon. And back then, there were lightning fires and also fires that the Native Americans would start to make, to kind of clear away the brush to make it easier to hunt. And so now, of course, we've got lots of trees, and there's even a campground there. But back then, it was pretty open. Now we do have an amazing collection of spear points and arrowheads and other tools that were used, and most of these were used by people, the early people throughout history. But the little arrowheads didn't come about until 500, so they came along a little bit later. And if you just turn around, you'll see totally different situation here. All right, so now we've got the early settlers coming into this area. Most of them were Norwegian, around McFarland. There are also, a little bit later, some German families that came. But this represents an early Norwegian kitchen. And you can see some of the tools that are on the wall that they used for their particular foods that they enjoyed. Are any of you Norwegian? Any of you have a Norwegian background? No? Oh, yes, the cameraman. Wonderful. Okay, so we're quite proud of this particular display. Originally, the walls were just temporary, and some of the gentlemen on our board of directors built the nice, sturdy, permanent walls, and really gave a nice touch to this display. Okay. Over on this wall, we have an old Maxwell automobile. Remember Jack Benny? He drove his old Maxwell. He wouldn't, let it go. Now we have just a young girl and a boy who are just seated there. They're obviously not really driving it, but we've got quite a few artifacts that represent the early automobile. On this particular display case, you can see some of the tools that were used, and they had to be used quite often because the early automobiles were not very reliable. So they had a whole toolkit they had to carry along with them. Now, this is a very early tire, and natural rubber is quite light. And you can see the spokes are wood over there, and then this is a more modern tire. But they liked the idea of having the white part, and so they're having a white wall similar to the old-fashioned natural rubber tire was quite in vogue. And I'm going to ask you to just turn around, and here we have a child's bedroom. It's supposed to represent about 1900. This is a Jenny Lind bed, and Jenny Lind was a famous opera singer from Sweden, and she came over to the US and performed, and she noticed this special type of bed, and she just loved this bed. And then it started calling the Jenny Lind bed, and it became quite popular in the early 1900s. The quilt is very old. It's over 100 years old, and this quilt is also over 100 years old. And the doll was made in Germany, and the most of the body is soft, and it was stuffed with straw, and it was actually quite inexpensive, and so this particular doll was very popular. We're very pleased to be able to have this display of Pete Nelson's shoe shop. Just about everything you see actually did come from Pete Nelson's shoe shop. He was the shoemaker in McFarland for 50 years. He was born in Norway in 1851, and this gentleman over here, Mons Hansen, was also a shoemaker, and he actually helped Pete get started and showed him, the trade. He was sort of his mentor. And Mons was also the custodian at the Lutheran Church. And of course, we'll talk more about that later, but we've got all of the cobbler's tools here, and these are lasts. And you would find a last that was, similar to your foot, and then they would use he would use the last to actually make your shoe. Okay, we'll go over here to the general store. This was one of the first displays that we made in the museum. And it was a lot of fun to make it. And of course, the kids are always intrigued by it too, because there's just so much to see here. It's a general store, which means, of course, there was everything you can think of for sale here. Food, material for making clothes, even dishes, penny candy. The kids are always interested in the penny candy. So what we do is we say, well, now, if you don't happen to have a penny on you, why don't you come back during the summer with your parents and bring a penny, and then you can have a penny candy. This particular book was actually made by John Anderson. John Anderson had a store early on in McFarland, and he was also the person to organize the first McFarland State Bank. And speaking of the McFarland State Bank, we have our newest display over here. As you know, McFarland State Bank was bought out by one community bank, so it is no longer. But it certainly had a long and interesting history in McFarland. So John Anderson got 24 investors to sign on to becoming the stockholders of the new bank. And 5 of them were women. So that was rather progressive of him. This is the safe that was installed back in 1924. Here's a picture of John Anderson and his wife and their home, which is still there on Main Street. And early on, Homer Vick was hired. He was hired when he was 15 years old, and he received $2 a week. And apparently, he did a really good job because he rose through the ranks. He became the head teller. Eventually, he became the bank president. And he led McFarland State Bank through the Great Depression. And McFarland State Bank did not go belly up. They were solid. And then, of course, later on, we had E. David Locke. And David Locke was quite prominent in McFarland for many years. He helped contribute to the library and many other things. And he was the one who said, you ought to have a little space in the museum for McFarland State history and McFarland State Bank history. And we agreed with him. So these are all items from the early days of McFarland State Bank. Okay, we'll go into the Lake Wabisa room. So this new addition was actually added fairly recently. And the reason that we added it is because we were gifted this double-pointed rowboat. And we had no place to work on it to restore it, and we had no place to display it, so we added on. And we also have a nice records room through there too. Yeah, that's where we, keep records of families and so on. But this particular boat was used on Lake Wabisa. Now, originally there were little resorts all along Lake Wabisa. There was Edwards Park and Larson's Beach Resort and Rockford Heights and Camp Leonard and Crescent Park, Morris Park, Brixton Park. And on the other side there was Wabisa Beach. And we know that this boat was used in Lake Wabisa. It wasn't used in Monona or Mendota because those boats were a little bit larger and deeper. Now this boat, along with all those other boats that were used at the resort, came from the Turville Point Boat Works. And when we got it, both ends were open. The seats were missing. There were, let's see, I think, yeah, this deck was, I think both decks were missing, or they were in such bad repair that we actually redid them. This was the original breastplate, which would have gone here. And this, I'm not sure what that was for. But at any rate, down below we have pictures showing the progress of restoration. And in this room we also have a display on ice harvesting. Ice harvesting was very important in the Four Lakes area. Apparently the Four Lakes, Mendota, Monona, Waubesa, and Kegonsa all had good ice. And they would chop big blocks of ice, and then they would use horses to pull the ice blocks up to an elevator and then get them up into the ice house. And they would pack them in sawdust, and the ice would stay cold all summer long. And all of those little cottages and those resorts along Lake Waubesa did not have electricity. And so, of course, they had ice boxes. Here's a saw that they used for sawing the blocks, an ice axe, a drill, and then these pike poles were used for kind of moving the ice blocks around. Over here we have a little display of all of the things that you could purchase at the resort store. Just about every resort had a little store connected with it. So you could get your kerosene for your kerosene lamps, you could get groceries, you could get little knickknacks, little souvenirs, tobacco products, and of course fishing gear. That was very important. Lots of bait. And then over here we have more fishing gear, some of the old time.
So the resorts were on Lake Water?
We had the old,
Oh yeah.
when I was young, we had to put the sign up.
Oh, you
25,
did?
50, the iceman would come in with the ice.
Oh yes, exactly.
That was
Yeah.
before the days of refrigerators.
Yes, exactly.
I'm
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Like the
that's
Green
great.
Lantern. Did you mention that about the Green Lantern restaurant? Because that was the ice.
Oh yeah,
House
there was
first.
an ice house.
and
Yeah,
then
by the Green
Right by the
Lantern.
right by the tracks. You know, so then people would come and load up the ice there.
Uh-huh.
But that's why they got the name the Green Lantern, was they would put the Green Lantern out to signal to the
Stop and
Train.
pick up ice.
Yeah.
that they had a load.
And they had
Yeah.
an ice thing on Mendota. I seen the horses
Mhm.
bringing ice in big
Mhm.
blocks. They had a big old barn. They filled the ice and put sawdust all over it.
Yes.
And they kept it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something
Yeah.
how it kept it cold so long.
So over here we have our little toy display, and you can see that most of the toys are made of wood or metal. This little guy was made of celluloid, which is sort of the precursor to plastic. And then behind you we have woodworking tools. And of course, when the first white settlers came to the area, they'd actually first usually stay at the McFarland house. The second floor of the McFarland house was like a big boarding space, and then they could get organized and then find their property, and then they'd build a log cabin because they were poor Norwegians, and that was one reason why they came over, is because they really needed farmland and they were not very wealthy. So these are all tools that were used to make their log cabin. And we have our farm barn over here. We have a forge for doing blacksmith work, and the anvil for working on the metal. This is kind of interesting. This is for a bull, and they would put that on the bull when they didn't want him to see where he was going, so he was, a little more docile. And then we really switch gears because we go into our 1920s kitchen. And in the 1920s is when the electric refrigerator was first introduced. And here you see a picture of one with a condenser on top. We've got one of those at the Larson house.
My family.
And your family had one, yeah. But they still hung on to their ice boxes for many years, even into the 1950s. And the children like to see that, you know, we've got a fake block of ice here. And then that keeps the food cold. It's down below. So, yeah, so this is a very nice ice box. This cabinet was one that was quite popular with you could have your flour in here in a big bin, and then you could just bring it out this way and sift it as you go. Yeah, so this is a gas stove, and that was popular in the 1920s. Yeah, and this woman, of course, is taking a little tea break. Yeah, and I think we need to switch now?
Yeah, he was hoping we'd wrap up with
Okay.
the Stars, so.
Okay. All right, so we are going to switch.
Maybe, oh, here he comes. Okay, so when I'm giving tours with the third graders who come in the fall every year, we read this first of all. So you probably heard from Jane about the Scari family who donated over 1,100 items to our museum. And this came from their estate on Hidden Farm Road. When you go out Elvium, Hidden Farm is out there, the disc golf course and the dog park is in that area. So there were 9 children born in this cabin. There were 11 children overall. 2 were born in the white frame house that you saw in that one photo probably. And Albert was one of these children. He was born in 1878. His father built this cabin probably around 1850. And then in June of 73, we started dismantling it and taking it here, putting it on a concrete slab. Watch your step as you come in. So, welcome to our Scari log cabin. We are always happy to show this, and the kids think this is their favorite thing when they come to the museum. They always want to know, can we go upstairs? And at the end of the tour, if they're good listeners, we'll go upstairs, okay? So you got to be good listeners to handle that. You can ask good questions too. So I'm going to start over here by showing you this wall. And this is, you can see on the bottom part, the 3 or 4 logs there are very flat and very light gray. And you can see some axe marks there. And then the top 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 logs are rounded and brown. Well, when we took the cabin apart, there were logs that were rotten. And they absolutely didn't have any strength to be put back up, so we had to replace them with telephone poles. And so we left them to show what was done at that time. The chinking, of course, is made with concrete, and back then it wasn't, there wasn't concrete. They chinked the logs with mud, straw, and rags, anything they could to block the wind and the rain and the snow from coming in. That was probably an endless process that the kids had to work on as well. Where's my broad axe here? Excuse me. So the logs that were flat, flattened, as you see on the bottom there, were probably flattened with this broad axe, okay? And as the log is laying on the ground, they probably straddled the log and then whack, whack, whack this side and whack, whack, whack that side until they had a flat log. The floor at that time, the very beginning floors probably were made with dirt. You can imagine trying to keep the cabin clean and sweep up the dust or whatever, that kind of thing. And then, of course, planking became into vogue as they had more time and effort to put that together. A lot of things were made with wood, and this old bed here is pretty nicely made. But you can see the springs on this bed are made with rope. And if the kids like to feel, and you can hear the straw or the hay that's inside for the bedding. And so this is where Pa and Ma slept. You can imagine they weren't very tall, and they might have had a baby right next there, because 9 children were born in this cabin, but unfortunately, or sadly, not all of them survived real long. Some were, only 2 of the family lived to be beyond, 2 of 11 lived beyond 50 years old. And there were several children that passed early on. So a lot of things are made with wood because that was the resource that they had at that time. And you can see right there that's a kubastol, which is a Norwegian high chair made out of a big log and some other pieces of wood. Very, very special, that kind of thing. The other things that you can see on the table here, you've got carved dishes, and here's a scoop. And we have many other things made of wood here, a lot of dishes and things like that. Behind Connie and Joyce there, you can see a wall, a shelf there, probably things that they brought over in that trunk that were more special, pewterware at the very top there, and so on. And right behind Connie there is a little bathtub for the children, and of course, we don't have running water here. Well, we have some outside. There's a pump, there's a spring, there's the river, there's the lake. And of course, the kids would have to bring in the water, and Mom would put this over top of the shoulders of the youngsters who were 3rd grade or stronger enough to hold this and carry buckets of water on the rope and the hooks. And then, of course, it would go on the stove or in this container here, where this is kind of the corner of the home that was like the not the bathroom, but the bathroom was outside, of course, the outhouse there. But this is where they washed up and Pa did their shaving and that kind of thing. Feel free to ask questions anytime. So I was going to show you a couple things here made of wood, and this is a great big old mixing bowl, probably for making bread or other kinds of things. And I'm going to put this over here for a time being. And of course, you need flour. And of course, here's where the flour came from the store. And you drive your horse with your wagon to the store and bring home the bags of flour. You might bring home a bag of salt. The salt would go in this box here, and other kinds of things that you didn't produce on the farm. And of course, if you needed a scoop here, they made a scoop, and that would, you throw your flour in here, and of course you probably have, you may use eggs or milk, stuff like that. You'd have them fresh right outside by the barn here. Well, we need to mix it up, so we'll use one of these. Here, I'll give you one here to pass around, Joy. You can take a look at that one. This is you can use it like this to mix things up, or you can use it like this. This is your power mixer right here. All right, and if you look at these pieces, can you tell me what they're made from?
Wood.
Well, yes, that's good. That's good. What kind of a tree?
Cherry.
No? Turn it the other way around, Joyce. Like that. There you go. That's how it grew.
Oh, really?
That's the top of an evergreen tree, a Christmas tree. Dick, you want to tell them the story?
They used the Christmas tree from last year to make these.
Oh, for
Yeah. So
what did they finish them with? Or didn't they?
They probably didn't back then.
Yeah.
No.
So the main piece of equipment in this cabin is this wooden stove. It provided heat all year long, or when they needed heat. But it also was the main source for getting hot water, ironing, and also making food preparation. And also, if you're going to give a bath to your youngsters, then of course the water had to be warmed up because they'd start crying if you gave them a bath with cold water from the spring. So I'm going to do another demonstration here real quick. And you may recognize this right here. It is an ironing board. And here are the irons. They're on their heat source, of course, right now. Ooh, it's hot too. Ooh. So we're ready to go here, and we'll do a little ironing. And this is rather pretty. And I forgot to tell you, this is cordless. No electricity at that time, and there's no sprinkler with it, no steamer with it. So they use this plant called teasel. And here, you want to take that and take a look at it. And teasel is a terrible weed that was brought over from Europe, and it is gaining much control over ditches and that in town of Dunn and other areas in our state. If you go up Highway 51 toward Farm and Fleet, you'll see it in the ditches there on the left end and both sides. It's a tall, the tall stalks are this high, and you'll see these silhouettes, and then it's the leaves and that are right now growing about 1.5 foot high or so, and then it'll produce this on their second year. So this was stuck in a cup of water, and the seeds have gone out of all the holes there. So we're about ready to iron, and so you take that, and every little drop of water that would come out of that seed pocket would be able to use in the sprinkler here. And of course we're ironing back and forth, and we got to move it again. And wait a minute. Oh, it's not hot enough. So we have to put it back on the energy source here. And this is a cool iron because you can take off the top and put it on another one that's already hot. So you don't waste any time waiting for that to heat up. And then you can go back to ironing, sprinkle a little bit more here, and ironing, and there we have it. So we'll put this away. So when I do tours here with the third graders in the fall, I asked them, I said, I'm always putting the iron on this end of the board. And how do I know that that's where it had been put before? Can any of you figure that out? Look at that board, please. Why do you think I put it there? Go ahead and touch it, Connie. You're
Ridged.
so.
It's dried out.
Every time that iron was put down there, and it's being hot and it's very heavy, you want to hold it. So when it was hot, it was put down there. Those points on that iron dug into that wood. So you can imagine that this is maybe a depression that was created over 100 years. You know, however old this board is and however long it was used for being an iron. So this is one of my favorite things. It's so simple, but it has some stories to tell.
That'd be a big woman to do that.
And ironing had to be a labor of love for those pioneers, because every time they went to town with a white shirt on, it was neatly ironed, that kind of thing. So, of course, nothing was wasted here. We had they dried corn out, of course, and the cobs were saved if they weren't eaten by the pigs for fire starter. And of course, the kids would bring in wood, and they kept this fire going the whole time. All right. Oh, and I forgot to tell you about this. So when this sack was empty, they'd be using this sack again, and not only for putting grain back in it, but and I'm going to go right behind you here. I'll let you, can you see the printing? So this is a lady's undergarment. Can you imagine wearing this thing underneath your dress? Okay, and of course curtains were also made using sacks, and you can see the printing on the curtains here from that.
My
Okay.
mother made out of flour sacks made for ironing.
Oh yeah, and those are probably old flour sacks of some kind. All right.
They could put me in there.
Yeah. So, would you like to go to the top of the stairs? Hold the hand railing, and you can all go up there. You can't get very far, but you can just take a peek.
I'm not going to try it.
That's fine. That's fine. So, I would tell the kids that storage is up there, extra things are up there, and also this is where the older kids would sleep. Okay, and please don't talk loud and wake them up. Now, the other thing that I want you to do is see if you can find Grandpa's long underwear. And tell me what color you see. It's red. He's got a union suit hanging up over a rocking chair up there that's drying. So that's how that would be done. One other wooden thing that I have here that is interesting to me is the fact that you can see different colors on this washboard. Of course, this would be put in a bucket of water with soap, with lye soap. And Dick, here, let me have one of those. Yeah. So here's your lye soap. If you want to touch it, and you can see it kind of is a little greasy in that, but that would change the color of this, of course. And but here we have some socks that need some work, so we'd have to up and down. This is your agitator, of course, to work the dirt out. And of course, then these were hung up on the line outside to dry. And but that's a really cool hand-carved washboard. And of course, the soap was made. This is lye soap, made with lye. And I told you about that in the inside, that there was a lye box or a stand in the lobby. Lye was made with ashes that would come from that stove, and they'd be put in that wooden box and poured water over it, and then it would drain through, and that gray, ugly, nasty liquid would be used with other kinds of materials there to make soap. And the main ingredient, of course, was pig fat. And in the fall, that's when they would butcher, because that was when it would be not too hot, and it would be better for the meat if you're preserving it. So, so the kids pass this all around, and they may smell it, and then they say, "What is that greasy stuff?" And I said, "Well, that's from the pig fat." Ooh. Thank you. Any questions? Dick, you got anything to add here?
The heater?
Oh, yeah. Here's my wife always had cold feet, and I should have bought her one of these. This is a bed warmer, and of course, at night, before Pa would want to go to bed, he would fill this with hot coals from the fire and lock that in place here, and then tuck it underneath the covers for a while, right where the toes would be. And then right before bed, then he would put this back on the stove, emptied out or whatever, and tuck his feet in there, and it'd be nice and toasty warm for his feet. So, your spinning wheel here. Every corner of this area had a different area. Of course, here's the sleeping area for the babies and for the parents. You have your baking area, kitchen area over there. This area here would be your wash area with the soap and your bowl and pitcher of water, and the shaving area. You folks know what this is for?
Oh, beating rugs.
Yeah.
Beating rugs.
No, this
Beating rugs?
Rugs.
Yeah, right, yeah. I don't know, did Mom ever chase me with this kind of thing? I'm wondering, but
You were a good boy.
yeah, I was. So. Any other questions? Dick, anything else you want to share?
That's it.
All right, let's go to the annex here. Watch your step, please. So this is now our farm display area. This is called the annex, and it's our farm display area, and we've got a lot of different little areas in here. And we're talking about a period of maybe 1850s older to 1900, and so before electricity and before the advent of cars and trucks and tractors. So how are things powered back then? Horses?
Manual.
Manual, yeah. People power.
People.
People power and animals. Not only horses, but cattle as well. Oxen in particular. Oxen were very strong, but they were slow. So the horses made things a whole lot better and fast. So you see a lot of hand cranks on this stuff here. Here's your sharpener, and you see a picture of some ladies there sharpening a knife. You could use this for axes and that kind of thing. In front of the cabin was one that you could sit on and pedal the wheel rather than with a hand crank here. Here's another yoke, and you can see the cool hook made of a little part of a tree, crotch of a tree here. And all these things were hand crank tools. Behind you, Joyce, is kind of a bare part, and that's because that's where the hog pictures were, and we moved some of those back into the main lobby right now. And then Conrad looked straight ahead and up there, and you can see the DeKalb sign, and all those things and pictures related to harvesting corn. And the picture, the illustration, the colored illustration there shows two horses eating corn while the farmer is picking off the grain or the corn and throwing it into the wagon. And you can see the tools that he had there. He would put that piece of equipment on his hand, and then it would help hook the corn and be able to harvest it quickly. And without even looking, he could throw it and hit the wagon area, because there you see on one side of that picture there's a large section of extra boards, and that was called the bang board. And my father used to do this because I told you he was born in 1899. He would open up the fields before my brother-in-law would drive the tractor pulling a 1-row or 2-row corn picker. And if he wouldn't open the fields with the horses, then all those stalks of corn in those first early rows would be knocked down, and of course the grain would be lost or wasted. Those horses are really not supposed to be eating the profits from the corn there. So my father had a wire mask like you see there on top for the horses' noses, the muzzle. And he would pick as fast as he could, and he would not even look and just throw the corn and hit that bang board, and then oh, he's out of corn. So he'd say, giddy up, walk, whatever, to the horses. Dick and Days, walk, and then whoa, and they'd do their thing while he didn't even have to worry about the reins. So, and the grinder here you see, the corn sheller, of course you put your corn in the top there. Joyce, you can see there's the corn cob coming out, and then the corn would fill in the bucket below there, and anything missed, of course, the pigs would clean it up. My father and mother also used it for husking walnuts in the fall, because that outer husk was pretty nasty to get off, and then that would help them dry out. Okay, this is a remade vegetable chopper. The metal parts are originally here, but your produce that would not be usable in the house, the husk or leaves from a cauliflower or whatever it might be, could be chopped up, and then that would be more easily eaten by the hogs at that time. So let's see, let's go down this way a little bit here. And if you see the sack there for E.G. Sigelco, and Earl was my neighbor when we first moved to the McFarland area, and I believe it was his grandfather who farmed that area, and he drove 2 oxen on a wagon, as you see in the picture there, to Milwaukee to sell his grain. It would take him 2 weeks to make the trip by oxen. I told you they were slow. The picture, yeah, that's a pretty brutal kind of thing there, but that's one of the way for dehorning, yeah. And you can see in the picture there, that is Dale Marsden, our president, his cousin, I believe, or uncle, moving a heifer by the wagon, and you can see the heifer's wrapped probably some kind of bag, burlap bag or whatever, around the eyes and that, so it doesn't panic when it's being transported that way. And you can see a cattle mass there. That was used probably on a bull as well to move them around without getting into trouble. And you can see a big yoke there for a single oxen on that really dark brown one, and then above there is probably one for calves for training them, because that's a much smaller yoke at that time. So, all right, let's move on down here to the milking area, and you can see pictures of how my parents and many other people started milking. Everything was done by hand. There's some wonderful stories about that from, right underneath that lower picture there, it's called Farm Chores. Yeah, really cool story there that was given to us by Betty McConnell. And of course, here's a cream separator, and that's hand cranked as well. And the milk was poured in the top, and you turned it, and the centrifugal force separated the milk from the cream, and you filled your buckets with, or your cans with one or the other there. And to the left here on that scale, it says 495, and that was the number for the farmer using that can. So when that went into the dairy, then they would know whose milk it was, right? And that's probably would weigh close to 100 pounds, over 90 pounds. So that was a hefty piece of equipment to move. Of course, the cattle were grazed all the time, and you can see that. And the cool thing is, modern farmers are going back to rotational grazing, just as it was done back then. We've got a cool part of a barbed wire collection that's one board of 6 with many different kinds of barbed wire at that time that was used. And you can see other equipment above there for stretching the wire or for wrapping the wire up. Very, very, very different. Let me squeeze in here, Connie. Okay. Right here, of course, are here's a box butter churn, again hand cranked. Now, whoever made this decided they didn't want to crank. They didn't want to go up and down with your old butter churn, so they put a crank on that with your belt here, and then when that is cranked and this wheel goes up and down, this holds that in place and does the work for you, kind of thing. I'm kind of covering up the handle here. Can you tell me what this wire is all about? It's related to the pictures. This is a chicken catcher. Yeah. For on Sundays, you know, they didn't have meat all the time, but on Sundays they usually had a chicken for lunch or dinner. And so the chicken that was roosting in here on this fanning mill is now in the lobby of the or the window display by our lobby there. And so if Ma says we're going to have chicken for dinner and I need that old red rooster, well, Grandpa may go out with the kids and then throw some corn on the ground, and when the rooster hops down to get the corn, that chicken catcher would nab a leg, you see, and then of course Grandpa would take the chicken over to the chopping block and dispatch it, and of course probably soak it in hot water and all that stuff. Dick, you have any stories about that?
No, that's good.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So it wasn't just so easy to do dinner that way, and the kids, the third graders that I give in here, talk to him, and here they say, oh, you know, they're not sure they want to have chicken the next day, I suppose. And then over here we have a lot of beautiful farm equipment, very, very old, seed spreaders. Here's one that has just got like a belt on, and you move it back and forth and it scatters the seed. This rotates, throwing a seed out. You've got another one here with a hand crank that has gears and scatters the seed. You've got a very big one here that is for, now this part is just taken off for viewing, okay? So this would have a strap over your shoulder, and you'd wear it in front, and you'd work this handle back and forth, and as the seed would come out on the back side here. So watch this move, see? So that's how you would scatter the seed out as you walked across the field, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Corn planters, potato planters, all here with hands, and you'd stick it in the ground and move it back and forth that way. Okay, here's your old well, and here's you've heard the song, The Old Oaken Bucket. Well, there's your wooden bucket. And these are a lot of the farmhouses that were in our area as well. The kids say, well, that's Paul Bunyan's cell. Well, I'm not sure who put that sign up there, but Paul Bunyan had a bigger cell than that, I can guarantee you. So, but they all know about Paul Bunyan. Now, this is a face of a barn as it may have looked way back when. You can see pictures here of the barn. Some of you remember Joyce Wilt, who is very proudly showing off her barn and her farm area here. And you had your hayloft door here, and your sliding doors here. Rock and limestone was at the bottom of the base of the barn. And over here we have some horseshoes that were used. I'm not sure, not really horseshoes, but they were a type of horseshoe that was used for putting on the horse's feet so they could walk in wet areas, marsh areas, and so they wouldn't get stuck, kind of like snowshoes in the wintertime, okay? And this is a diagram of the structure of a barn, and here you see they're pulling up hay on a rope and pulley system which connected to the rail here at the top of the barn roof. And this door would be down, and so there'd be a man using something like this, or there are several different kinds of forks that were used to load the loose hay or the bales of hay. And so if this is pulled down, you see, then you stab the hay with this fork here, and then you'd be pulling it up, and you can see it going up here, and it would hit the rail and then go on in down to where about in the barn you wanted it dumped. How did it get up there? Well, there was a series of ropes and pulleys, and you can see we got some here and here that would be connected throughout the barn and come out one side of the barn and be pulled with a pair of horses, a single horse, or a tractor. I used a tractor. My dad used a pair of horses, and basically one person would be driving them or telling them to walk or stop and that kind of thing. And so the person in the barn that's mowing the hay, he would say, well, we want it over here, and he would yell, whoa, or stop, something like that, to let them know when to pull the rope and dump the hay in that area. The dangerous part, when I remember my brother-in-law loading the hay on the wagon, was to be on the wagon at that time, because when the hay is going up, there's not so much a problem there, but he would get to one edge or climb down, because when that hay that pulley would hit that rail, going rail. There was kind of a bump and a noise certainly, and at that time, if this did not hold, those bales or that hay would come right down on top of him if he weren't on the edge of that wagon. So he could get crushed by whatever was up there. So over here we have our horse section, and here are many different kinds of bits that were used for the horses. Some very gentle and some not so gentle. Your double twisted wire snaffle was probably for a really tough horse, not very pleasant. This is a measuring stick, and you don't measure the horse by the top of the head, you measure the horse by the shoulder points, the withers. And so that withers would be at the base of this neck of the horse here, and the horses you would have, you measure them in hands, a hand being about 4 inches wide. And so a 15.3 hand horse would be 15 times 4, 60, plus 3 is 63 inches at the base of the withers. Yeah, at the withers, yeah. So a hand being roughly 4 inches. Okay, I think I'm done in here. Any questions? Other stuff that is interesting to see, but or read about, but you'll have to come back on a Sunday in the summertime or by special request.
Okay.
We're happy to give tours anytime.
Thanks, Wes.
You're welcome.
Good job.
Thank you.
Good job, thanks, Wes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so this is our Wisconsin in the Civil War display. So Wisconsin was very active in the Civil War. As a matter of fact, Lincoln had his quota for each state, and Wisconsin met their quota almost immediately, and they didn't have to draft anyone because so many young men were volunteering. One of the groups in the Civil War was the Black Hat Brigade, and this gentleman is wearing the special black hat. And this Black Hat Brigade was established by John Gibbon. This particular brigade was made up of the 2nd, 6th, and 7th Wisconsin regiments, plus some Indiana and Michigan folks too. But he wanted his men to feel a special type of pride, and so he had these special black hats made for them. And at one point in the war, they were on this ridge, and they kept coming. And even though there were a lot of casualties, this other general was looking up at this ridge, and he said, "Oh my God, those men are made of iron." And so they got the nickname the Iron Brigade. And they had the tradition that they never retreated. Unfortunately, of course, there were only about a fourth of them left at the end of the war. But they were certainly instrumental in the Union victories. We also had a special mascot, Old Abe. He was a tame eagle, and he was the mascot of another group, another brigade. And whenever the fife and drum started, he would get very excited, and he would flap his wings, and the men would, he would inspire the men into battle. And the Confederates were always trying to shoot Old Abe, but they never did. They missed him, and he survived the war. And then he was put in the basement of the Capitol, and unfortunately the Capitol was made of wood at that time, and there was a fire, and he died of smoke inhalation. But he did live to be quite an old eagle. So on the other side, we have William McFarland's parlor. And just about everything that you see here was actually in William McFarland's parlor. Here's a picture of William McFarland in his famous buffalo robe, and he was very proud of that robe. In later years, here's another picture of William in front of his home, the McFarland house, and he married Celia Thompson, who was a widow with 5 children. And William McFarland was a very kind man, and he adopted those children. He treated them as though they were his own. And then Celia and William had 3 children of their own. The first one, William Jr., unfortunately died when he was 10. But his oldest son, Joe, and Charles lived to be quite old, and they had big families of their own. Now, Joe's oldest son was Roy McFarland, and Roy was very active in the museum, and he was on the board of directors. Over here we have the Gold Star Mothers display. It was traditional during World War I and World War II that if your son was in the service, in the military, you would put up a blue star in your window. And if your son died, you were given a gold star. And so you put a gold star in your window. And here's a picture of young Helmer Nelson. He lived on a farm, well actually our little horse farm was part of his bigger farm. And he was really looking forward to taking over the farm from his parents. But 3 days before the end of the war, he stepped on a landmine and died. And of course the family was heartbroken. He was the only son in the family. And in 1930, those Gold Star mothers were invited to take a ship over to France and visit their son's gravesite. And here's a picture of Mary Nelson at Helmer's gravesite. Over here we have a representative of the Red Arrow Division of World War I. And the Red Arrow Division was highly regarded in World War I. And here is some other artifacts from World War I. And then we go from World War I into World War II. And again, we have a gentleman from Wisconsin's 32nd Red Arrow Division, which again was very well thought of and very active in the war. Here we have a gentleman who was in the Vietnam War, Dennis Chamberlain. And he was a McFarland native, and unfortunately he was killed in the Vietnam War. And here is his picture over here. Now, on this side, we have a lot of artifacts which represent the Norwegian heritage of McFarland. Early on, most of the people living in McFarland were from Norway. They had a lot of storage boxes that were made of wood that they, made by hand. We have a fiddle over here, and it is said that the Norwegians loved music. They'd at least have a fiddle in their home. And if they were wealthier, they might even have a pump organ, and we have a pump organ over here. And of course, if they were very wealthy, they would have a real piano in their home. In this little area, we have information about the Lutheran Church. The evangelical Norwegian Lutheran Church was very prominent in the village. Just about everyone attended. And here is members of the quartet, the Salmodican Quartet. And Bertha Larson, Nora Thompson, Brixton, Charlotte Thompson Sullivan, and Elsie Thompson were part of this quartet. And here are some psalmodicons that were used. They were generally used in the early Norwegian churches until the church could afford to have a pump organ. And they didn't really sound like much because they just had one string and you played with a bow. But if you'd put 4 of them together, they would actually sound like an organ. And these ladies were quite popular. They performed all over the Midwest in the 1930s and 1940s. Over here we have a huge loom that came over from Norway about 1850. It came over piece by piece, and as you can see, it's very large. It's also called a barn loom because they would have to operate it in the barn because they didn't have room in their home, for this huge loom. But of course the loom was very important for making rugs and even making material, making cloth. Over here we have representative of Rosemallen. Peter Lynn was a fellow who immigrated to Stoughton in 1907, and he really sort of revived the art of Rosemallen. It was sort of dying out in Norway, but he revived it again. And there was another woman, Ethel Kallheim, who was sort of his student, and she made a lot of these pieces. This piece was by Peter Lynn, and so is this little piece, and then the others are by Ethel. Again, in this area we have a larger picture of William McFarland and his wife Celia and her children, and then the baby is William McFarland Jr. This is the second depot in McFarland. So William actually built the first depot. That was the whole reason for McFarland, was to have another stop in between Stoughton and Madison. And William was asked to build a depot, and he did, and he also built the McFarland House. And that's where the early Norwegians would come and stay overnight until they could get organized and find their property and build their log cabin. Here we have a picture of Main Street, McFarland in 1905. And you see the post office, which has been replaced by this building, by the museum. And then Tolliff Lewis had his furniture and undertaking shop next door, and then later it became the dentist shop. But Tolliff would he would build his furniture, and he would have his caskets up on the second floor, and there was a little elevator that he used to bring the caskets down. And he also was a barber, and here is some of his equipment that he used. Over here we have McFarland State Bank, and this is a picture again of Homer Vick, who was the head teller, and he implemented some safety features. This is a bulletproof cashier's window, and he also had a very good vault with a special locking mechanism, and he was the reason why the gangsters from Illinois would not come up and try to rob McFarland State Bank. Over here we have Mary McFarland's washing machine. This was a wonderful invention, and Mary McFarland was William McFarland's daughter-in-law, and she was the one who would use this machine. And that is the end of our tour. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah.